Become a sustaining member of the Commonwealth Club for just $10 a month. Join today.
Hello, and welcome to today's virtual Commonwealth Club program. My name is Mina Kim, co-host of Forum on KQED, and your moderator today. As the club continues to host virtual events, they're grateful for the continued support of their members and donors. Visit commonwealthclub.org to learn more about membership. The club would also like to thank the Bernard Osher Foundation for supporting today's Good Lit event. And it is now my pleasure to welcome Ban Ki-moon, former Secretary General of the United Nations and author of the memoir, Resolved, Uniting Nations in a Divided World. Throughout his diplomatic career, Secretary General Ban worked to establish international peace, climate change, and poverty. He's advocated for vulnerable communities and women's rights and gender equality around the world. His humanitarian efforts continue as he mentors a new generation of global citizens and leaders. And just as a reminder, if you have a question for our guest, you can submit those in the chat. Mr. Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, welcome. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you, Mina Kim, and Kara, Mark, and the dear members of the Commonwealth Club of San Francisco. It's a great honor and pleasure for me to be with you. And thanks to all of you for your interest in my life story and my philosophy for our future. I hope my memoir, Resolved, will spread my ideas and stories to the wide audience of the world that is responsible for the world today and tomorrow. I hope it will inspire possibility, spark action, improve cooperation, and ultimately encourage people around the world to become global citizens. As you know, my own lifespan coincides with colonialism, wars, dictatorship, and struggle for democracy in my country, and also constant threat, security threat caused by North Korean nuclear issues, etc. I was raised during the Korean War in 1950s and came of age amid terrible poverty and watched my country grow from dictatorship to stable and prosperous democracy with the help of the United Nations, led by the United States. Without UN troops, humanitarian agencies, and advisors, Korea would not be as she is today. These experiences grounded me in the importance of peace, security, opportunity for all, and collective responsibility. Beliefs that shaped my life and my tenure as a Secretary General of the United Nations. You could say I was a child of war and the product of multilateralism. I can't credit San Francisco for my early love of America. In fact, when I was only 18 years old, I was lucky enough to have been invited by American Red Cross Society. And my first visit was San Francisco. And I was welcomed by my host family, Mr. and Mrs. Robert Patterson. They regarded me as their fourth child, and teaching me English slangs, ping pongs, and they brought me here and there. That was eye-opening for me. Small and young, poor boy from a rural Republic of Korea. Then suddenly San Francisco, United States. Now, as the Secretary General of the United Nations, I visited Patterson's house, where I stayed a week there. And particularly when I retired from the United Nations in 2017, I came back to that house to celebrate 100th birthday of Mrs. Patterson. She passed away soon after that, but this is my very happy memory. Then we went to Washington, D.C., and on August 29, 1962, all these foreign students, about 140, were invited by the White House and met President Kennedy. That was the most enlightening and most memorable opportunity for me, even now. At that time, President Kennedy told us that, well, national boundaries doesn't mean much, but what is important question is that whether you are ready to extend your helping hand. That moment, I thought that I should do something for my country. How can I serve my country? I wanted to become a diplomat. And later, I became the diplomat of the world. That is my story. And based on United Nations Charter, peace and security, development, and human rights, that has been my guiding lines and principles. Human rights are not only voting and free speech, but true equality. There must be opportunity for all, regardless of sex, race, religion, or region. Development is not just about fighting poverty, but pursuing dignity of human being. No person can achieve their potential without good health, like global health now, quality education, as you are having in the United States, sanitation, decent work, enough food, and the sustainable development. Peace is more complicated than just a cessation of conflict. True peace requires security and stability for people who often have rarely or never experienced it. Hostilities consume energy, resource, time, and human lives. Conflicts make human rights and development impossible. So whenever I travel to the region in distress, I would try to visit a local camp of refugees. I really wanted to meet young people and encourage them, telling them that United Nations is helping you as they did for me in 50, 60 years ago. These are some of my stories. Of course, I have been meeting various kinds of people, dictators and democratic leaders and business leaders and civil society leaders. Therefore, I hope that these long-term goals of the United Nations will really require perseverance, patience, and creativity to bring peace and sustainable growth to all the people. So while I am still very much concerned about this politicized and carbonized and polarized world, but I think we have a hope. So I really count on the members of Commonwealth San Francisco to continue to play a global citizenship role. And this is my just a brief beginning opening statement, but I will be more than happy in engaging dialogue with all of you. So thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you, Secretary Bond, for starting us off with those lovely opening remarks. It's actually really nice to hear that the San Francisco Bay Area was your introduction to America, and the kindness of the Pattersons that you mentioned played a big role in helping you fall in love with this country and inspired your commitment to international issues, which I remember reading about in your book, Resolved. The other thing I remember reading about is actually bringing us to present day, your assessment of the way that the United Nations has responded to the global coronavirus pandemic. You have actually been pretty candid about how UN agencies could have been more involved. I'm wondering if you can talk about the differences the UN could have made here, in your view.
You see that this has caused, first of all, by human activities, degrading ecosystems. So it is sort of two sides of one coin: climate crisis and pandemic. They're just two sides of one coin. Had we cared our environment more, and had we cared our nature, the privileges of nature, we would have been much better. Then second issue is multilateralism. So lack of multilateralism has caused much more sufferings for world's people. Fortunately, now with the President Biden, multilateralism is now returning to its own place. More unity, solidarity, and more joint working together. This is a very important one. At the beginning of this coronavirus, the world has been fighting about so-called origin of coronavirus, whether it was China or China was denying, and there were some investigations, etc. President Trump was beating on all this rather than carrying people. Then it has been all the same. Each and every country was going their way. Rich countries, of course, they were capable to provide all medical support, and later vaccine was developed. But those poor countries in developing world, they were just helpless. That is why more people unnecessarily had to be affected and died. Now that multilateralism is coming back, I am very much encouraged by the recent G7 summit meeting. I think G7 summit meeting took place during one of the most challenging times in recent history, caused by COVID-19, climate crisis in parallel. Therefore, our lesson is that unless we work together and address these challenges with global partnership, we will have no hope. Now, G7 has committed to provide 1 billion doses of vaccines, among which President Biden said that US would take care of 500 million doses. But I think that there should be more. It's a very good political leadership, but I hope that there should be more to help developing countries. There is COVAX. COVAX,
Yes.
WHO has been really doing, but WHO is a small UN organization without much resources, without full support of the member states, like the United States and European Union and other wealthy countries. It will be only the people who will be suffering, particularly in developing world.
Yes.
Thank you.
Do you think your successor, though, Secretary General Antonio Guterres, may have missed an opportunity here? I only say this because you did cite the way that the UN responded to Ebola as an example of how it could have improved its response to COVID-19.
Well, he has his own limitation. During the time of President Trump, President Trump has almost paid no attention to multilateralism. Mm-hmm. And in fact, US withdrew from WHO at the beginning and the peak of this crisis. That was immoral. There may be some complaints about the way WHO had been doing, but before complaining, we should have first acted to save human lives, to provide all medical support. But just withdrawing from WHO, the main health organization of the United Nations, then what does that mean? The UN would be almost powerless without strong support of the member states, particularly the United States. That's the largest country. So that's what I regret. And that also reminds me, reminds me of what I did during 2014 Ebola crisis. When Ebola crisis swept the Western Africa, Liberia, Sierra Leone, Guinea, United Nations took immediate action, together, working together with United States and European Union, WHO, and I was leading. For the first time in the history of the United Nations, you Americans, British, and French, they dispatched the United Nations forces. Normally we have a peacekeeping forces, but for global health purpose, soldiers were deployed in Liberia, Guinea, and Sierra Leone to block the movement of the people. That was the way we were able to eradicate Ebola in a very quick time. Yeah.
You've talked a lot about your concerns about multilateralism. And I mean, I guess we all knew multilateralism would take a hit when former President Trump was elected, because in many ways he campaigned on that. But I wonder if you were surprised at the extent of the damage and disarray that it caused. As you point out, he withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal. He withdrew from the Paris Climate Agreement, which I know is something near and dear to you. I'm wondering how costly you think that was, and in what ways that sort of movement away from multilateralism.
I would say, frankly speaking, as a former Secretary General, I may not be able to say so if I were still in the position, but now I'm a private citizen and I have a free speech. That does not mean that we don't have a free speech, but there is some political, sensitivity when dealing with the head of state of the United States, etc. But what I believe that what President Trump did, withdraw from Paris Climate Change Agreement, that was politically very short-sighted and economically irresponsible, scientifically wrong, scientifically very wrong. So I don't know what had motivated him to withdraw from such a hard-fought Paris Agreement. It took almost 20 years to negotiate, to reach that Paris Agreement. It took 9 years of my time as a Secretary General out of 10 years. It was I, who really devoted whole time and energy, mobilizing the leadership of the political leadership, business leaders, and civil society. That is the work of whole working together. Then suddenly, the strongest, most resourceful country withdrew. That has given serious damage, particularly in political sense. Now that President Biden has taken as his first presidential action to sign and return to climate change, and also convened on April 22nd on Earth Day, a summit meeting on climate, that was very much reassuring. Now we have to do much more to overcome and cover what we had lost. Then JCPOA, Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action on Iranian nuclear issue. This was also very much irresponsible as number one G1 country. By any standard, United States is the leader country of the world, and everybody is looking to the United States. That is a reality. While each and every member state of the United Nations are equal, but still there are some leader country among equal. That is United States. I think US government leaders and citizens should bear in mind this kind of global responsibility of the United States.
Yes. As I hear you use words like that his behaviors were immoral and short-sighted. And as you talk about things that you can say now as a private citizen, I'm reminded of a description I once heard of the role of UN Secretary General as having a great deal of power and almost simultaneously none at all. In the sense of, do you think that that's an accurate description?
Uh, one of my predecessors said that the UN Secretary General's job is most impossible job on earth. So UN Secretary seems to be very well respected. I think in terms of respect, I have been enjoying all this respect. Sometimes I felt very much humbled by all this respect. Looks like we have full power, but sometimes we are lacking resources. But US President and other national government leaders, they have power and resources. Of course, there are some degree of differences in terms of resources and also power. But United Nations represent views of whole worlds based on UN Charter. The pillars, 3 pillars of the United Nations are peace and security, human rights, and sustainable development. There is no leader in the world who can represent the whole world like this. So that I felt very much honored. At the same time, I had to deal with each and every leader of UN member states so that they could act as global leader based on global citizenship. But what I can tell you now, again, freely, I have not seen many such leaders who were genuine global leaders with global leadership. They are at best, they are national leaders. They were easy hostages of domestic politics. So that is sad. That is why we are having more and more conflicts, more and more divisions. Now, by every standard, we are living in 21st century. All the science and technology, communication and transportations, and we can get everything what we need. But world has become uneven in terms of availability of these resources. So that's the role of the United Nations. That's why the Sustainable Development Goals with the 17 goals were adopted during my time. So I regard this Paris Climate Change Agreement and Sustainable Development Goals are two most proudest achievement during my time. Of course, I cannot claim that that was my job only. That was the work of all the people of the world.
You said you have not seen too many truly global leaders. Is there one who comes to mind for you?
Well, even though he is not with us, Nelson Mandela, I met him while he was still alive. Then he is really somebody who can be real a global leader based on global citizenship. That is why he is respected. After 28 years of imprisonment by those people, he just forgave everyone. And I think he has shown, he led by example. What I have been speaking to world leaders and also particularly leadership level people is that they should lead by example. The words and deeds must be consistent. I've been trying to do that, but of course I'm not a perfect person. But I'm still trying to lead by example. Yeah.
I want to take a moment, if I could, to talk about North Korea with you and the best way to address the challenges posed by North Korea. I'm thinking about this too as you talked about the responsibility of the United States and your concerns about the leadership of ex-President Trump. He engaged with leader Kim Jong-un in unprecedented ways during his presidency, 3 face-to-face summits. I'm wondering if you felt that engagement with Kim yielded anything, or if it put the US in a position worse, I guess, than it was before those summits.
Whatever kinds of conflicts or differences, engagement, that's the best way to resolve. So in that regard, South Korean government, US government, and many countries, European Union, they really have been trying to engage North Korea with sincerity, with a genuine sincerity. But it has been North Korea, which has been really isolating themselves and developing nuclear weapons against all these international rules and regulations, particularly Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT. North Korea is the only country in 21st century who had tested 6 nuclear bombs, 6 times. There is no such country. Of course, there were countries like India, Pakistan, and who tested nuclear bombs in the 20th century, and they are more or less in a certain framework, within framework. But North Korea is completely out of framework now. That is why President Trump and the Korean presidents, first, starting with the Korean president, 3 successive presidents, like President Kim Dae-jung, President Roh Moo-hyun, President Moon Jae-in, they all visited North Korea without having realized any return visit by North Korean leader. But in any way, there were a series of summit meetings between South and North Korea. And there were a series of agreements between South Korean and North Korean side. I was one of such, I myself involved in that very important, the first ever nuclear negotiation in 1991. Then US President, President Trump became the first US president who met North Korean leader. He became the first US president who stepped on the soil of northern side of Korean Peninsula. So in that regard, there were a lot of, brighter as well as hopeful signs. But all these hopeful expectations just became almost nothing now. North Korea has returned to its real positions, not engaging with either South Korea and United States. Then what I, as a professional career diplomat, there are many different styles of negotiation. The way President Trump had been doing was a sort of a top-down approach without caring about the details. So some people, some media criticized that it was a reality show game type of negotiation. But that has given sort of some misunderstandings, mis-expectation, unnecessary expectation on the part of North Korea. Then Kim Jong-un might have expected that he could deal by cheating or by cheating United States and South Korea. That is very unfortunate things. Now that President Biden has his own strategy, I think President Biden's strategy is more practical, more realistic, sort of a bottom-up approach, making sure that there should be a solid and firm, step-by-step agreement so that at the time when there is a summit meeting, there should be no such problems. Now, there was a top-down agreement, in Singapore, but nothing had been implemented. And North Korea has just put themselves into a shell now. This is a problem now. They have completely blocked themselves, isolated themselves. Their economic system and also economic situation seems to be very dire. And even recently, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un announced sort of arduous march, which was announced once in 1990s during his grandfather Kim Il-sung. At that time, you should know that more than 3 million people starved to death because of famine. So it seems that under Security Council sanctions of the United Nations upon North Korea, they are not able to have any trade with foreign countries, including China too. Their best friend and the strongest supporters. So if I were in their shoes, then I should be more practical and realistic for their own people, for the reconciliation between South and North. Why just, keep himself isolated like this way? That is a very sad things, but we have to engage North Korea. And now the special representative, special envoy on North Korean issue of United States Ambassador Sung Kim is in Seoul, a meeting with the Korean president and the high-level officials discussing about the closer and tighter cooperative and consultative relationship and discussions on North Korean issues.
I was struck by how it appeared in your book at least, that the prospect for reconciliation, as you put it, it did feel like you saw that as pretty bleak at this point. The other thing that I was struck by was the detail with which you went into about the role of the Korean War in your life. It broke out when you were 6 years old, and clearly very traumatic for you and your family. Your mother was pregnant and gave birth as she was fleeing. I'm wondering how the Korean War, how the trauma of that experience influenced your view of the UN, your view of conflict.
Of course, I was just 6 years old at the time, so I didn't know what was communism like or what was war like. But I only felt by myself difficulties, hunger, and cold, cold weather, and so shivering in the cold weather without much to warm us. And there were no schools. Schools were all destroyed, bombed. So my life as a young child was very, very difficult. But we were very hungry. We were very thirsty. But looking back, I think all people, children like us, were also thirsty and hungry for good education and for a better future. I think quality-wise, the education which I received 60 years ago might not have been as good quality as of 21st century. There was no AI, no computer, or something like this. Our learning was based on textbooks. That's all we had. Even textbooks were provided by UNESCO. But my mind, my heart was very much full of something to do for a better future. I think that must have motivated me to work as public official, public servant, first for my country. Then as I grew up with my visit to the United States, I was able to open up widely my eyes, my visions. By growing up, I think I made my own, commitment as well as my visions different, higher and higher and more to the world. That's why I was able to be elected as a Secretary General. But that is why I hope I've been working very hard that I should not let there should be any such kind of a poor and hungry young people in the world in this 21st century. That's why I really paid highest priority on quality education, like a Global Education First Initiative, GEFI. I worked with Gordon Brown, former Prime Minister of United Kingdom, and also worked together with Malala Yousafzai, the Pakistani girl, who was almost killed by terrorists. But what she said, all these terrorists are more afraid when a girl is reading a book or girl is holding a pen than weapons. That was quite inspiring. That's why she's still working very hard for promoting this global education. Then I think still there are so many poor people who are suffering from abject poverty. I think all these United Nations goals, Sustainable Development Goals, which were announced during my time, adopted, that is the most ambitious and far-reaching vision for humanity, for the betterment of this world.
What do you think is the biggest mistake the UN made during your tenure? What is your greatest regret during your time as Secretary General?
Well, personally speaking, what I have not been able to do much was on Haiti, and also Syria. Now, at the beginning of my term, there was a terrible earthquake, and more than 900,000 people were affected, and tens of thousands of people died because of cholera. Even though it was not scientifically clear, there was a strong protest and complaint that this cholera virus was caused by UN peacekeepers who were positioned there, who were sent there to help Haitian people from all these disasters. That was very unfortunate and regrettable things. Even there was, I've been really trying to mobilize as much as possible. First of all, financial support and all the medical support. I worked very closely with the President Bill Clinton, who was working as Special Envoy of the United Nations on Haiti. And Hillary Clinton was the Secretary of State. So we, three of us, mobilized $9.9 billion a day. All the world's leaders, they were one. So they all came with a full of support. Then we mobilized WHO, Margaret Chan, Director General at the time, mobilized a lot of medical support. But still, we were far short in terms of supporting all these people, such a massive disaster. Another regret is that I don't think it was it's a system failure of the United Nations that we could not have done much more for Syrian people. Security Council has always been divided on Syrian issue, and even purely on humanitarian issues, they were divided and vetoed the resolution to support humanitarian goods. And then in the end, after 10 years of this crisis, conflict continuing, then 6.6 million Syrian people have become refugees somewhere out of their country, either in Lebanon, Turkey, Jordan, Iraq, Egypt, and elsewhere. More than 5 million people are living on the poverty line. All these infrastructures, water, energy, electricity, medical facilities, they are almost all destroyed by their own fighting. So this is a terrible, and I feel, very sorry and regrettable that the UN could not have done more. That is, I call, system failure, the division among permanent members of the Security Council.
Yes, you've said that the P5 reflects the global power structure of 1945, not today, but you also said that that is unlikely to change ever, and also pointed out how the UN Charter does not give the Secretary General power in this arena. But then what are we left with? I mean, what are the procedural changes, I guess, that could happen to make the Security Council more responsive to today's geopolitical issues and to focus more on the global greater good, which is what you've emphasized?
There have been many attempts, efforts to make some reforms in the Security Council. There are many also big countries who really want to join as a permanent members of the Security Council. But somehow, all these efforts have not yielded any progress. Everybody was talking about, okay, let's reform the Security Council. We agree. Even the P5s, they say that we agree, let's have a reform. Then they are not moving. So in a metaphorical way, I was saying that after frustrations, I said in a metaphorical way, it's something like you are sitting in a car with gear neutral. Then once after such a strong pressure from the member state, they just put the gear, shifted gear to 1. But at the same time, they were pressing brake as hard as, and pressing this accelerator. There was a big, engine sound. But this car was not moving even an inch, same way. So that was my expression, expressing the concerns as well as a frustration on the lack of political power.
Before we go to audience questions, I do want to just ask you about what you've described as your signature achievement, which is the Paris Climate Agreement. And I mean, it truly is an achievement, and it requires, the 180 biggest emitters to develop aggressive carbon reduction plans to keep global CO2 levels from rising by more than 2 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. It also arguably has a weak enforcement structure. And I guess I'm wondering how you assess its success 5 years later, especially as there has been little consequence for nations that ignore the pledges.
This is a binding agreement. Normally, General Assembly agreement is not binding. And this is an international agreement with a binding force. So each and every state parties, 197, they have to implement what had been agreed in Paris Agreement. But there is a significant lack of political will. Some people say that it is up to developed countries, because it is all these OECD countries who have caused greenhouse gas emissions and the degraded ecosystems in the name of industrialization. But the impact of climate change did not care where you are living. So all developing countries have been also devastated by this rising sea level and rising global temperatures. Therefore, there is no one except, who would be exempted from this. Therefore, we have to take urgent action, all of us, but this campaign must be led by the wealthy countries, OECD member states, United States, and European Union, and also China as a #1 global emitting country. United States is #2 global emitting country. Republic of Korea #7. Japan is #5 or #6. Therefore, all these rich countries, they have to mobilize all political will, first of all, commitment, resources, science and technological support for all this. That's why I have been working very hard, even after my retirement, as chairman of Global Center on Adaptation, which is headquartered in the Netherlands. And I have been working as a national chairman of the National Council on Climate and Air Quality, even though I just stepped out of that last month. Then I'm using all my, all my efforts and all my capacity as a former Secretary General to speak out to the world leaders to unite. In that regard, the G7 summit meeting had very serious discussions and also agreed to fully mobilize $100 billion a year. This is an agreement by this Paris Agreement when they made a political statement, in fact. United States, Japan, and European Union, they would mobilize $100 billion, and that has been accepted by whole state parties. So from this year, every year, they should provide the science and technological support in the amount of $100 billion until such time when we will be sure that we have taken enough action. That was reaffirmed by G7 summit meeting last month, earlier this month.
Well, we have some questions from the audience and a couple speaking about world leaders and asking questions about President Biden. So I'm going to combine a couple here. These questions include, do you think the current state of affairs under US President Biden are going in a positive direction? And do you have any advice for President Biden?
I had been working closely with then Vice President Joe Biden, working together with President Obama. So I have known him very well, and he is a very committed, very experienced person. He has been a lifelong politician, but what he has been doing as a chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee in the Congress, as well as now vice president, now as a president of the United States, we have a much, much higher expectation and hope that he will lead not only United States, but this global multilateral system in a way to meet the expectations of sustainable development goals and Paris Climate Change Agreement, and also human rights, human dignity. I am confident that he will really exercise his global leadership based on global citizenship. Of course, there are domestic politics, Republicans and Democrats. I know that how they struggle for political power, but the US, there is a lot of expectation from outside world, particularly developing countries, that they are happy with the way multilateralism is now returning to its normal track under the leadership of President Biden. That's what I expected from him, and I am very hopeful, and I'm quite convinced that he will be a good leader. Yeah.
Well, another audience question here is, I've read that you described your negotiation approach as being inspired by water. Can you tell us why?
That's very interesting. When I was first appointed and beginning my job as a Secretary General, there was some difference appreciation in between the East and West. What is the virtue? What's the leadership? The Western leaders, they should be more assertive and sometimes aggressive and direct. But this Asian culture, which I have been taught since I was a young boy, is more subtle and respectful for others, first of all. So I've been speaking to UN staff, starting from UN staff, and talking to world leaders about the way, saying that the highest virtue of a human being is to act and look like water. This is in Korean, we saw 상선약수. That is four words. In Chinese, also four characters. That means among all the virtues, then water is the one which really we should use as leading by example. Let me give you some examples like this way. Among 5 elements which has been discovered by the physicians of the world, there are 5 elements: water, fire, wood, metal, and soil. Those are 5 elements. Then among these 5 elements available in this planet Earth, then which is the strongest one? People often think that is a fire or steel, but there is nothing which can beat water. Water can extinguish, fire can be extinguished by water. And even metal, just water can just decompose it, and wood too. But water has some special characters in itself. It is colorless, transparent, and it always flows from higher to lower place. If water does not flow and stay long in one place, that becomes a stale. That is a corruption, which we call it in our normal societies. And water does not confront all the times, unless it is absolutely necessary. So when water flows and there are rocks, then it just goes around the rocks, not just to confront unnecessarily. But look at the case of flooding or tsunami. Then water can roll, hold the huge rocks, and even destroy concrete feral buildings, big buildings. That's why you can use your power anytime, but not until it is absolutely necessary. But be modest. First, listen to the people's voice, and lead by example. That's what I've been trying to lead by example. And I really wanted to show to my staff of the United Nations, and they gradually understood my leadership style. That's what, one day, you may check, the August 4th is the birthday of President Obama. One year, it was maybe 2014 or so, I wrote a calligraphy, just 4 letters. Then I have given it to President Obama. Look, Mr. President, your leadership should be like water. So I pointed out the water, sui, or in Chinese, sui. He was very much amused and very happy, and he agreed with my philosophical point.
Well, I just have 2 more questions. One, is an audience question. And actually, we have audience members who really want to know what you do in your personal time. This person wants to know if you have any hobbies or something that you like to do in your free time. Another person wonders if there's a favorite book or author that you have. So,
Well, I myself think that I am a sort of dull person. So I didn't have much, a special hobby. I've been working all the time. So that's what I feel sorry for my children and for my wife too. But I've been working very hard, very hard. When in school, study. When in the job, public service, I really devoted all my time for public service, public service. It was day and night. As a Secretary General, I have been really trying to listen to the voices of people around the world, particularly those people who would be discriminated, who would not have any power or under suppression of autocratic leaders. So constantly, I have been traveling around the world. I don't claim that I have visited all 193 countries, but at least I have visited 160 or some countries, except the small Pacific Island, Caribbean states. And I met almost all the leaders of the world, listening to their voices, what their challenges were. That's not hobby, that's a work. But that is what one,
that's as close as you get.
Yeah, frankly speaking, I don't have anything to tell you that I am good at certain sports or, but I think I have also been able to enjoy good friendship, some respect from the people, and by being humbly approaching the people, so they all listen to my voices. So I've been speaking sometimes directly to the eyes of the autocratic leaders. You should not do this. You should care your own people. So that has been my life until now. And as a former Secretary General, then you may ask what I am doing. I have more jobs than Secretary General now. Secretary General is just one job, but now I'm holding almost at least 2 of international and national positions, mainly working on humanity issues, climate change, sustainable development, gender empowerment, global citizenship, etc. Yeah.
Well, you've established the Ban Ki-moon Foundation for a Better Future to promote global citizenship. And I do wonder if you could leave us, the audience members, with what that means, how to be a global citizen.
Global citizen. So I have established two centers, like first one, global center on global, Ban Ki-moon Center on Global Citizens in Vienna, Austria, and Ban Ki-moon Foundation for a Better Future. They are mutually reinforcing my activities as former Secretary General. Then what does global citizenship means? That is what, when you address something, before you think about you or your own country, your own family, you should care the other persons. Listen first carefully and sincerely the challenges, what their challenges are. That was inspired. That I was inspired by what President Kennedy told me in 1962 when I met him at the White House. He said, the national boundaries do not mean much, but national boundaries meant much at that time during Cold War. But he said, didn't mean much. And the question was whether you are ready to extend your helping hand. That's a compassion. So one can have a passion always, but you should have compassion. all this, when passion is not matched with the compassion, you may not know where you are going. You are going sometimes most probably wrong way. But this compassion, you have sometimes young people, I'm talking to young people that they are full of passion, energy. But this energy and passion should always be matched with compassion. Look for beyond your borders and look for other people, how you can help. And before you insist on your own views, just listen. That's the beginning of the global citizenship.
Well, former UN Secretary General, thank you very much for talking with us today.
Thank you very much. It has been a great honor and privilege for me to talk with the distinguished members of the Commonwealth Club of San Francisco. And let us work together to make this world better for all. That is our and your moral and political responsibility living in 21st century. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. 8th UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. His new memoir is Resolved, Uniting Nations in a Divided World. And if you'd like to watch more virtual programs or support the Commonwealth Club's efforts, you can do that at commonwealthclub.org. I'm Mina Kim. Thank you very much and take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.